Have you ever met someone who constantly plays the victim? They twist reality and they make every situation about how they've been wronged. If so, you might just be dealing with a covert narcissist. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sherry. I am your favorite prophetic mentor and coach. And this is a place where we talk about narcissistic abuse, healing, and empowerment through a biblical lens. So if you are new to my channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that way you don't miss a video. Because your girl's been consistent. She's coming at you weekly. And I'm so proud of myself for that. So let's get started. In this video, we're going to be diving into the story of King Saul. He was a biblical example of covert narcissism. His actions in 1 Samuel reveal classic traits of a narcissist. They look like victim mentality, insecurity, manipulation, and passive-aggressive tactics. So what exactly is covert narcissism? Well, unlike overt narcissists who are loud, grandiose, and attention-seeking, covert narcissists are more subtle, they're more secretive and calculated. And this makes them one of the most dangerous types of narcissists to be around. They often appear humble, introverted, or even self-deprecating. But beneath the surface, they are just as manipulative, entitled, and controlling. See, what makes covert narcissists so dangerous is that you often don't realize you're dealing with one until years later. Yes, years later. Their tactics are so subtle that the signs aren't always obvious, which is why discovering the truth can be really, really painful. And by the time you recognize the manipulation, you've already endured significant emotional and psychological damage. Covert narcissists aren't just found in toxic romantic relationships. They are CEOs, they're pastors, teachers, leaders, and even presidents of companies. They craft a public image of kindness, wisdom, or humility, but behind closed doors, they're calculating, deceitful, and often emotionally or spiritually abusive. And the contrast between public persona and private reality is what makes them so difficult to detect. This is why discernment is key. The more you understand covert narcissism, the less likely you are to be deceived by one. I want to talk to you about King Saul. Y'all, King Saul was anointed by God to be the first king of Israel, yet he was deeply insecure and emotionally unstable. Instead of leading with confidence and humility, he ruled with fear, jealousy, and paranoia. He constantly sought validation from people rather than trusting in God's approval. Now, despite his position, Saul drained those around him emotionally and spiritually. He manipulated, he controlled, and he even weaponized his authority to maintain power. His jealousy of David, who God had chosen to succeed him, drove him into a downward spiral of obsession, deceit, and ultimately destruction. Now, Saul is a prime example of a covert narcissist in the Bible. He presented himself as righteous and humble, yet behind closed doors, he was driven by insecurity, manipulation, and an insatiable need for control. Y'all, his inability to take accountability for his actions and his tendency to blame others made him a toxic leader who caused great harm to those closest to him. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down 3 of Saul's traits and how they mirror covert narcissism. And we can learn from his story, right? We can learn how to avoid falling into the trap of emotional and spiritual manipulation. Now, the first trait that we see in King Saul is that homeboy was fragile and he was sensitive to criticism. Y'all, King Saul could not handle any form of correction or perceived rejection. And the moment that his authority or his actions were questioned, he reacted with defensiveness, anger, and even retaliation. When the prophet Samuel confronted him about his disobedience and told him that God had rejected him as king, instead of humbling himself and genuinely repenting, King Saul became obsessed with maintaining his public image. He didn't grieve his disobedience. He grieved the loss of status. In fact, he even begged Samuel to still honor him in front of the people, revealing that his concerns wasn't about making things right with God, but about how he looked in the eyes of other people. This is a classic trait of covert narcissism. They don't seek true transformation, y'all. They seek damage control. They cannot handle being held accountable. And when confronted, they shift the focus to how the situation affects them rather than taking responsibility. Now, if you've ever dealt with someone like this, you know how exhausting it can be. You might try to have a simple conversation, but instead of them acknowledging and owning their faults, they'll either do all or some of these four things. They'll either play the victim, they'll play the blame game, they'll try to gaslight you, or they'll try to seek validation from other people. And here are some common phrases that you might hear when they do this. If they're playing the victim, they'll say something like, "I can't believe you would say that to me after everything I've done for you." If they're deflecting blame, they might say something like, "Well, if you would have just handled it differently, I wouldn't have reacted that way." If they're gaslighting you, they may say things like, "You're overreacting. I didn't even mean it like that." They may seek validation from other people by running to their friends, their family, or even the church leaders, just to paint themselves as being misunderstood and paint themselves as the victim in the story and make you look like the villain. But here's why it's so dangerous. Saul's refusal to accept correction led to his downfall. His insecurity and fragility caused him to lash out, which led him to harm those that were closest to him, especially David. Now, the same thing can happen to us in our real life, y'all. When someone cannot handle correction or rejection in a healthy way, they're going to resort to manipulation. They're going to resort to control and even emotionally or spiritually abusing you. Now, the lesson here is that you cannot help everyone, especially someone who refuses to see their own flaws. And if you're constantly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their insecurities, y'all, it might just be time to reevaluate that relationship. That's not normal. Now, the next trait that we see in King Saul is a sense of entitlement without the effort. King Saul expected continued favor and loyalty without doing the work of true obedience. He wanted all of the benefits of kingship. He wanted honor, he wanted power, and he wanted authority, but he wasn't willing to fully submit to God's instructions. Instead, he acted as if he was still entitled to the throne, even though his actions had led to his downfall. And when David was anointed as the next king, Saul became obsessed with keeping what he believed was rightfully his. Rather than accepting that his disobedience had consequences, he spent years trying to sabotage David, thinking that he could force his way into keeping what God had already taken away from him. This kind of entitlement is something we see all the time. It's when someone expects rewards, respect, and privileges without putting in the necessary work or making real changes in their lives. And if we're not careful, we as believers can find ourselves operating in this same sense of entitlement. But here's how it shows up in romantic relationships. You may be or have been in a relationship with someone who demands loyalty. They demand affection and respect, but they just don't put in the effort to be loving, consistent, or even faithful with you. Yet, they expect you to always be there for them. But when it comes to meeting your needs, crickets. They fall short and make excuses. If you try to hold them accountable, they might just say something like, "Well, you should love me unconditionally. You're supposed to. And this is just the way that I am." And see, from my personal experience, that is truly how they are. They're not kidding when they say, "This is just the way that I am." That really is the way that they are. And if that's the case, remember, you cannot control anyone. You can only control yourself. So, for me, I'll say, bruh, continue to be who you are. Bye. Have a great life. Love you. Now at work, maybe you have a boss or a coworker who expects recognition and praise for minimal effort. They might take credit for other people's work and avoid responsibility. Or they might demand promotions without actually contributing. Just like Saul, they believe they deserve the position, even if their work ethic says otherwise. And in some friendships and family dynamics, some people feel entitled to your time, your energy, and your resources without reciprocating. They might even expect you to always be available, always support them through their struggles, and always drop everything for them. But when you need the same thing, guess what? They are nowhere to be found. And if you set boundaries, they make you feel guilty for it. It's like they're punishing you for protecting yourself from their drama, trauma, and abuse. Make it make sense. This is why it's so dangerous. Saul's entitlement led him to paranoia, jealousy, and ultimately destruction. Instead of repenting and making things right with God, he wasted his time trying to control and destroy David. And in the same way, people with this covert narcissist mindset drain those around them and create toxic environments. And finally, the third trait that we see in Saul was his ability to manipulate through victimhood. Rather than taking responsibility for his own actions, he constantly painted himself as one who was wronged. In 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 7 and 8, Saul gathered his servants and complained. Well, hold on. Wait a minute. Did you catch that? Saul didn't just sit in his own self-pity. He gathered his servants to complain. Now, this is a key trait of covert narcissists. They need an audience to validate their victimhood, y'all. They need to go get their mom. They need to go get the dad. They need to go tell their sister, your brother, your mother. Everybody needs to know. Everybody needs to know they're the victim. Everybody needs to know. They have to make sure everybody is drinking the Kool-Aid. All right, let's get back to 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 7 and 8. Saul called everybody together and said, "Is that why you have conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with David. No one is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me, as he does today." Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he manipulates his followers by making them feel like they betrayed him. And this is what it would look like at work. It would look like a toxic coworker gathering around a group of colleagues to complain about how they're being treated unfairly. They're going to twist the narrative to make themselves look like the victim. They're going to drop little seeds in the minds of those around them to paint you in such a way that doesn't even reflect your character. But they have to do this in order to make you look like the villain in their story. In a relationship, a narcissistic ex will tell mutual friends a sob story about how you abandoned them, but they're going to conveniently leave out their own toxic behavior. Or maybe you're in a family where a toxic parent plays favorites and turns the siblings against each other by constantly playing the victim, by making one child feel guilty for setting boundaries. See, covert narcissists never suffer in silence. They need an audience. And if you're not careful, you just might find yourself caught up in their web of manipulation. Now, let's recap the 3 traits that we discussed in King Saul. We know that he was extremely sensitive to criticism and his little ego was a little fragile. We know that he had a sense of entitlement without effort. And we know that he manipulated others through victimhood. And these toxic traits don't happen overnight, y'all. They grow through small, unchecked choices that slowly poison someone's character, even a child of God. But when we name them and we confront these patterns, we create a pathway to accountability and spiritual growth. But here's the hard truth. It's not just about identifying these traits in others. We got to identify these traits in ourselves. Now, it's easy to look at Saul and shake our heads, but if we're honest, we can fall into these same patterns. How do we respond when God corrects us? Do we harden our hearts and get defensive or ignore his voice? Do we expect God's blessings without really putting in the work that it requires? Faith without works is dead. Do we ever complain and blame God when things don't go our way? See, Saul's downfall wasn't just about his mistakes, y'all. It was about his unwillingness to change. And that's what I do not want for you or for me. The Bible says in Hosea 4:6, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." But knowledge alone isn't enough, y'all. It's what we do with it that matters. So let's take what we've learned today from Saul's story and let's choose a different way. Not of culture's way, not of the church's way, but let's choose the King's way. One of humility, one of obedience, and trusting God. Because if we don't, we risk repeating history. So that's it for today's video, guys. If this resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I want to know. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye.